Well, we're back again after quite a long time, and we have been asked why it's taken so long and what we plan to do, and also, most importantly, why we concentrate or appear to concentrate on Gaza, on Israel, and what is happening in that eastern part of the Mediterranean. Well, the main reason is that we're Democrats, and I'm quite proud to be called an extremist in one sense, an extreme Democrat, because I see, as I think Greg does too, that we are one humanity with all our diversity, living on one planet, screaming through space, a planet which actually has enough resources on it, if they were properly husbanded, to feed, clothe, house all of humanity and our diverse floral and fauna as well. But we're in the process of destroying it. And part of that destruction is human destruction through bombs, through assassinations, through mass killings, through genocide, as well as the pollutions that carry on. And we get pushed into silos of greenwashing, for example, which are usually sponsored or by donors who are part of the same corporate entities who are linked to the same sort of system that creates the problem in the first place. That is why we exist, why we're doing these things. And why Gaza? Why Israel? Very simply because that is one area that sums up, to our mind, best of all, what is going on at the moment. It's like a situation after the Second World War, 1946. People in Poland and in Germany who were close to the extermination camps and saw the shipping of ordinary people in the most disgusting circumstances were questioned and said, we didn't know what was going on. They didn't want to know, perhaps. The same thing applies in South Africa even today. We've got people who said they didn't know what went on under apartheid. In this case, particularly regarding what is happening in what is still called the Middle East, no one can possibly have any excuse to say they did not know, because some very good journalism has been broadcast, has been written, and doctors have spoken out right across the board about what is going on. And we have heard from the Israeli Zionist government itself what they intend to do. So no one can claim that they did not know, they do not know. So that's why we tend to concentrate there. However, we're aware, as the United Nations has stated, that there are 44 armed conflicts going on around the world right now. How many of them can you name? I mean, can you name 5 even? I mean, of course there's Gaza, and West Bank, we include that. There's Ukraine, there's Sudan, perhaps Mali, perhaps you could think of the Rohingya in Myanmar. What about others? There are still others going on all over the world. We don't even hear about them. But they're part and parcel of the same degeneration, the same slaughter of humanity at a time when we seem to be in the process of destroying much of the planet as well. This is why we exist, why we try to do these podcasts, in the hope that people will begin to break out of the silos, the emotional and the, quite honestly, intellectual silos of protest silos in which they've been housed, to see what is generally the problem, that this is a systemic problem, and to educate ourselves, myself, yourself, everybody, and then to organize and to agitate to change things. That is why we exist and why we concentrate on, particularly at this time, Zionist Israel. We see around the world, from our point of view, an erosion of those little bits of democracy, those little bits of human rights that have been fought for so desperately, particularly over the last century, and the gains that have been made, often 2 steps forward and 1 step back. but we're seeing a vast erosion of the gains in human rights that have been made, not just in what was Palestine, Israel, Russia, North Africa. We can look at the devastation that's been sown. We've shown you many times before, such as this, for example. That looks like Gaza. No, it's not. It's Libya. Libya, where you had once a country which was run by a dictator, yes, but it was fairly peaceful. It wasn't left to the people on the ground to organize and overthrow the dictator. No. The great imperium, the United States, with its effective lapdogs, Britain, France, etc., came in and removed Gaddafi, bombed the place to blazes. And look at it today. It's now a war zone with two largely competing groups, but a lot of other small groups around the side. And who's supplying all the ammunition and the weaponry? Why? The Russians and the Americans. It's hardly surprising, therefore, that the armaments industry has become perhaps even more lucrative than the pharmaceutical industry. And at the same time, all the other conflicts. In Mali, for example, we now have the Russians through the Wagner Group directly involved. In other areas, the Americans, often through the CIA, are involved. This has been going on for years, of course. In Afghanistan, who created the Taliban? The Central Intelligence Agency of the United States were the ones who sponsored them. So this has been happening over and over again, and we have to ask ourselves why. We look now at this scene.
Explosions rocked the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk today, killing more than 30 people and injuring dozens. The bombing appears to be targeting Kurdish forces, which have been struggling to contain ISIS.
And again, it's not Gaza, nor the West Bank. It's northern Iraq, where, if anyone is aware of it, there was another genocidal activity carried out by a group called Daesh, the Islamic State group, a bunch of jihadi Sunni Muslims who went in and slaughtered men, women and children of the Yazidi faith. The Yazidis are an ancient religion, a monotheistic religion, one of those that grew at the time that Judaism began and Christianity spun out of Judaism. Yazidis spun out of that as well. And there's been no publicity about them. So what we're saying is not to run around looking for all these things, but to find out what is going wrong. Why are these things happening? Not how they're done. We know how they're done. We now have a situation where you have journalists, or people who still call themselves journalists, who are, maybe without being conscious of it, becoming propagandists by using, for example, when a young Palestinian whose parents have been killed, who has suffered torture perhaps, an angry young man goes into the street in Tel Aviv and kills with a knife the very first Israeli that he sees. That is regarded as barbarism, as savagery. But what about the most elite of the military, the fighter pilots, the bomber pilots, who take off and fly over Gaza and drop a 2,000-pound bomb onto a town where there are men, women and children, hospitals, kindergartens, schools, and kill hundreds of people? Which is then the savagery? Which is then the barbarism? These are the questions we really need to ask, and we're trying to get people to ask. I did mention what Seneca said about religion. Many of these instances, and it makes no difference, you see, someone's a Jew, a Christian or whatever, anyone can become a fascist, and that can lead into this extreme form of what's become known as Nazism. The BJP in India, a classic example. We can look at Orban in Hungary, which is fascist at this stage, and then what is happening in Israel at the moment and in that entire area. That is another reason we focus on the Zionist state, because it is again a classic example of the use and abuse of religion. All of these religions, fundamentally, depending on how you interpret them, have an underlying ethos of humanity, of love thy neighbor, etc., to use the standard Christian way of putting it. But the same thing applies within Judaism, with Hinduism as well, within most religions. But what we have is a situation of a distortion. For example, we have Benjamin Netanyahu calling the Palestinians the Amalek.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
אין חצי עבודה. רפיח, דיר אל-בלח, מוצרת, השמדה מוחלטת, תמחה את זכר עמלק מתחת לשמיים. אין מקום מתחת לשמיים.
ובסימן חג הפסח לומר שאנחנו צריכים להכות באויב 10 מכות, למחות את זכר עמלק, כמו שכתוב.
אשתי יקרה שרה, מוכנה יהיה פיצוץ גדול. למחות את זכר עמלק! אני בא לכבוד, מלך מזמנה נותן בראש, ומצווה חדבר, למחות את זכר עמלק.
What were the Amalek? Well, the Amalek, if you read the Bible, the Christian Bible for that matter, but better still, go back to the Hebrew if you can read that, or even the earlier texts, which I don't think very many people can read. The Amalek were a group that was said to have attacked the Jews when they were migrating from Egypt, a fact which is largely, I think, historians see as a myth. But God said to them to destroy the Amalek, not just the men, the women, the children, their dogs, their asses, everything. Wipe them out. Exterminate. Classic example. It exists. Go and look at Exodus and Deuteronomy, the 2 books which are both in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and in the Christian Bible. By calling all Palestinians Amalek, what did this lead to? Well, you have someone like Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. What did he refer to the Palestinians as?
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם, ואנחנו...
Yes, human animals. Interestingly, that is exactly the terminology that was used by certain of the Nazi leaders in Germany to describe Jews, Roma, Slavs, and other Untermenschen. Is it surprising, therefore, that we then had the soldiers preparing to go into battle against Untermenschen, singing about what they were going to do to the Amalek? Therefore, the killings were not seen, they do it with impunity because they're doing it in God's name. And you have a situation where, just recently, the Minister of Security, a man who is an out-and-out fascist, Ben-Gvir, handing out automatic rifles and would complete with clips of ammunition. You can see it here. Who was he handing them out to? He was handing them out to settlers, people who are moving in and chasing, ethnically cleansing, to use the correct term, Palestinians from the lands that they've lived on for generations, often killing them, injuring them, but driving them out and taking over. And what does the United Nations do? United Nations, finally, Antonio Guterres, I think he's an honest man, has admitted that the United Nations has a voice, but no power, which is exactly the situation as it has been with the League of Nations and the United Nations. They do not have the power. The power is still wielded by the imperial countries, and in this case by one major imperium, the United States, which incidentally has two of its biggest aircraft carriers stationed just off the coast of Israel. What are they there for? Because the United States is still supplying all the weaponry, the bombs, etc., and the money to sustain that state. They're there as a warning to anyone else who wants to step out of line and interfere with the client state of Israel, the American imperialist client state. Go there and we'll deal with you, is the message. It's a frightening message. It's a worrying message. And it's a message which is a total denial of the idea of one humanity in one world, which is what we should all be fighting for. But in order to do that, we do need to educate ourselves. We do need to know what is going on. We can go, we can read, we can talk, we can discuss, we can debate. I would quite honestly recommend, particularly those who are concerned about the whole aspect of Zionism and Judaism, to read that book. Stephen Friedman is correct. It's an assault on meaning. Much of the meanings have been distorted grossly, and he has written an immensely well-researched and well-written book, which is worth reading. But there are others as well. Think about it. Avoid the fake news. Avoid the propaganda. Dig beneath that. See what is happening. That's all we can do. Otherwise, who knows? We may have no future for humanity. We may have no future for the planet at all.